and we're good to go.
Cool.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to the Slave Ages podcast. I am very fortunate to have band leader, composer, and saxophonist Adam Larson on the podcast. I followed Adam's career since I think 2015. Adam, I think the album you had at the time was Selective Amnesia, which I absolutely loved. I know I wrote a review, and then uh, we kind of got together back in September of 2017 to talk about your album Second City, and I also reviewed that, and also reviewed your Listen with Your Eyes album in 2019. And then you had a series of wonderful albums. Oh God, I can't remember the name of them, but they were ones which based on different cities.
Hmm.
That was a few years ago.
Sure. Yeah, the With Love series, the With Love from New York, Kansas City, and Chicago. Yeah.
Yeah, great albums. And then I think it was maybe early this year or last year, or late last year, I got the Narrative Quintet album, which also features Clark Summers, who is on
Mhm.
your new album, which is called Movable Objects, which comes out September 6th.
Yes, sir.
And then has John Kurlansmertz.
It's a hard one. Yeah, Kazillermoot.
Kil-
Kazillermoot.
Kilmertz on
You're not the
drum.
first.
Yeah, he's also on the new album, which the band is called Hybrid, and the album is called Movable Objects. So I guess I'll ask the obvious question because you've had a really wonderful career, and I know you're busy as an educator as well. Why the change in terms of having this trio? Why have the hybrid? Why have hybrid?
So yeah, I mean, I spent like the better part of almost 3 years doing almost exclusively trio gigs throughout that trio trilogy project, which is really fulfilling. End of the day, it was a nice chance just to put together in the same room colleagues and friends that I enjoyed playing music with in different cities. Over my career thus far, and the idea was, okay, well, I want to keep that going, but maybe take one musician from each project. So representing the Chicago component, I have Clark Summers, who's one of my closest friends, one of the world's greatest bassists. And then I had John Kazillermood, who's, he's the reason why I felt comfortable moving to Kansas City. Both those guys are like brothers to me. John is such an amazingly deep musician, and he's on the Kansas City record. And then I figured, okay, I'll call myself the New York component of that. So the idea was to play together a kind of a hybrid group of those three different trios. And one of the first gigs we ever did, actually the first gig ever was a couple of Septembers ago. I put together a tour, and it's always kind of a nerve-wracking situation to introduce heavyweight musicians in your life to one another, because you don't know if it's ever going to work out. You would assume that it does, but sometimes it doesn't. So we descended upon Paschal High School in Fort Worth, Texas, at about 9 in the morning, and it's the first time John and Clark had ever met each other. And we played the first tune, and I was like, "Oh, what's going to happen?" And then the first three notes, I'm like, "Wow, this is special." So as a trio, we've been playing together off and on, and kind of augmenting that with some chords every once in a while over the past couple of years. Um, and I think it's just been a way really to have fellowship with two of my closest friends, in the world, and they're great musicians. So on my birthday this past year, I decided to take some studio time and just put together this record. We put together six different tunes, and I flew Clark down here from Chicago to just play. I think we played three or four gigs. We just went in Des Moines at a cool art gallery, and then we decided to put some stuff on tape. So here we are, 9 months later, putting out a new record, and pretty excited about it.
It's a wonderful record. I noticed that on the one you did last year with the Narrative Quintet, you did, let's see, two of the compositions on Hybrid or Movable Objects. They're all your compositions, correct?
Actually, that's one thing that I really liked about Clark and John. But Clark is like prolific. Like I write a lot, but Clark, every time we're exchanging voice notes back and forth, and it always feels like he's two or four or a million tunes ahead of me. So three of the tunes on that, so November to March, Immovable Objects, and Lasting, those are Clark's tunes. And then Dewey Garbeck, Flatline, and Flipchild, those are my tunes. So it's kind of half and half. And I love that about playing with narrative, especially because there's five voices compositionally, everybody writes, but also with this trio, Clark, I can always count on writing not one but several great tunes to consider. So I like from a leader standpoint, and again, this is more of a collaboratively led effort, I suppose. But it is what it is. Like when it comes down to the business part, I'm usually the one who spearheads most of the things, just because it's almost a compulsion, to like get the project together, get dates together, so on and so forth. But musically, it's nice to be able to play other people's music and not have to worry about like, okay, I made the meal, I cooked the meal, blah blah blah. It's like I get a chance to be inside somebody else's head for a second. So
Yeah, wonderful. So, is Clark in Chicago area or is it John? One of them is in Chicago.
so, so yeah, Clark is in Chicago. He's been there for like, basically his entire life. He moved. It was interesting. He was in New York from 2008 to 2010, and I was also there for my first years of college. And we lived 20 blocks away from each other, but never met each other, which is crazy thinking about it. And he moved to New York, and then it's just his story is very interesting because he's from Chicago, like I said, and he had been playing with Kurt Elling a little bit, moved to New York, and then got a call to go play with Kurt Elling again. And for about the next 14 years, that was his main thing was playing in that acoustic quintet with Kurt. And so he left New York in 10 and moved back to Chicago. But he's been a stalwart of that scene for like 30 plus years. And John is in Kansas City, but he's been all over the place too. Spent a lot of his life in the Des Moines area and did his graduate school work in Texas. So it's very cool, me having moved back to the Midwest after being in New York for 12 years, just to have different footholds in different cities where I can feel like, okay, not only is the musicianship going to be very high, but the hang is going to be great too.
Right, right. Because one of the things I think you mentioned when we chatted about, God, it was so long ago, was the musicians physically around you. Was there any issue with regard to recording given your locations? But you're all now in the Midwest.
Yeah, I mean, the only issue was just making sure we could get in the wintertime, get Clark down here from Chicago. And luckily, Southwest is pretty good to get in and out of Midway O'Hare to our airport in Kansas City. So yeah, I mean, and perspective is everything. Recording Selective Amnesia, like, there was no way I would have been able to do that record without like a crowdfunding campaign, just from the studio cost alone. So like, we recorded the entire album, this one that you were talking about today, in about 3.5 hours, and it cost us like $250 to record
Wow.
it. Versus like if we spent the same amount of time in New York, it would have cost like $1,500 regardless, at least. So um we all that to say, like there's the hardest part was just getting Clark to Kansas City, and that was not too bad. So
Mhm, mhm.
yeah,
So, where did you record the album?
we recorded at Weights and Measures. It's a really cool studio here in Kansas City. Great tracking engineer named Dwayne Trower. The sounds that he got off the board without any mix were super impressive. And then
Mhm.
I've historically, I've used David Darlington in New York for my mixing and mastering for, I'd say, probably 90% of my records. The record you listened to first, like Amnesia, that was mixed and tracked by Ted Tuthill, who's an amazing engineer who's my age, who now lives in LA and works with clients. Like Wayne Shorter, for instance. Like it's I can't afford him anymore. And um, I like to do the tracking here, and then I'll send it out to my guy in New York. Dave's discography, just if you're curious, I mean, you should go check it out. It's like everybody in the jazz world has used him, and then like Janet Jackson, like platinum selling records, and he's amazing. So I feel comfortable with kind of having a really good place to track here, and then I can send it off and get it mixed and mastered and have it the way I want it to be out in the world.
Mhm. In preparation for the album, did you share demos or did you just come into the studio together and arrange together?
We kind of shared things back and forth, and like I said, we had a couple gigs. Benefited having a couple gigs before the recording session. So we played a cool art gallery in Des Moines, which John, many people wouldn't think about, wouldn't assume this. He's a Irish Turkish white guy, and you don't look at him and think like, okay, master of Brazilian and Latin music, like initially. But that guy, man, he knows. I joke, but it's the truth. Like I have to try to get out a dictionary or a thesaurus or both sometimes, and he's like, "Oh, it's just a bata or it's a partito alto." I'm like, I have no idea what you're speaking about. Educate me. So um, we would send things back and forth, and we played at this art gallery that the leader of this really amazing Latin group called Paranderos, which John's been a part of, and he plays timbal, in that group. He's been a part of that for 15 years
Wow.
or more. The leader of that group owns this amazing art gallery in Des Moines called the Moberg Art Gallery. So we did a really cool concert there, and we played at my favorite venue. in KC, which is called the Ship. So we had a couple nights of kind of shedding the material together, and I kind of like that, Preston, where we don't overplay it because then we get in the studio and there's still some mystery and still like being on our toes a little bit. Um, it's a double-edged sword because sometimes I listen back on the record, I'm like, man, I wish I would have practiced more, you know. But most of the time it's like, okay, it's right in the cusp of like, okay, I feel comfortable enough to be not necessarily stagnant, you know, or in my head too much.
Yeah, I bet. But I imagine you're hypercritical anyway because you just want it to be the best it can be.
Yeah, that's just we could have a whole separate podcast about that. So
So your first upcoming gig is September 6th. The album comes out September 8th. It looks like it's Walker's Jazz Lounge in Wichita, Kansas. And imagine you, like you mentioned, you guys have already done some gigs together. Do you have a
mhm.
plan for the upcoming tour? Because it's pretty extensive tour.
Yeah, so yeah, we've as things are fluid with booking, we put some things even a couple of days before that. So we'll have Clark fly into St. Louis in the fourth, and we'll play this really cool spot called the Dark Room. My friend Bob DeBoo, who's a great bassist, and honestly, without Bob in St. Louis, there wouldn't be the jazz scene that we know it. He's like the mayor, and
Wow.
he's been hosting this jam session for like at least a decade now, every Wednesday, and so he's been very kind, especially since we moved back to the West, to either include me on the session or if I have a project that you know, would be good to present. He's let me sub out his own gig to play a gig there. So that's what he's doing very generously on the fourth. We'll start there at the Dark Room in St. Louis, and then we'll stay over. And the next day, we're going to do a concert at Jefferson Community College for their students in the afternoon, and then play a concert at Sax Quest, which is the world's like best vintage saxophone shop like that exists. It's amazing. You cannot find things if you can't find it there, it doesn't exist. So they've been friends of me. We've been friends, I should say, for a very long time. So we'll do kind of a masterclass Q&A performance there. And then on Friday, we'll play in Wichita at Walker's Jazz Lounge. I just played there with a wonderful drummer named Kim Hio, her group, a couple weeks ago. And it's an amazing club. It's in Wichita, and it's sold out. Every single set, and it seems like that's the vibe, which is it's amazing. Who would have thought, right? So we'll do that, and then we wrap up the first part of this tour with a performance of the Prairie Village Jazz Festival, which is a nice little regional jazz festival here in Kansas City that a couple years ago I had a good fortune of being asked to do it, and then the committee asked me back again this year. So that will be the only gig of this first stretch where we're augmenting, and we're adding chords. So we're adding Roger Wilder, who's, pound for pound, one of my favorite piano players to ever do it, but especially in the Midwest, very out of the bebop lineage and always playing things. You're with the right band members when they play things that make you consider your decisions. You know what I mean? And like, wow, I didn't. How do you do that? So um, the hybrid trio plus Roger. This past June, a couple months ago, we actually recorded an entire quartet record, which I'm sure that I'll hit you up about. That'll come out in 2025. So using that as a chance to kind of bring Roger back into the fold for that last little gig, and then we have a week off, and then the third week of September, we'll go out again. We're going to use a fantastic young bass player named Sebastian Arias, who's here in Kansas City. He's from Costa Rica, and just it's important to me whenever I can. I don't feel like I'm that old, but I'm old enough where it's starting to feel older. So giving opportunities to young, hungry musicians, that's what people did for me. And Sebastian is amazing. So it'll be the hybrid trio. Clark is with another colleague. It always seems like we have to fight, friendly, between saxophonists. So Jeff Bradfield, who's one of my mentors, an amazing saxophonist in the Chicago area, he asked Clark to do a similar run, like the 18th of September to the 21st. So I said, you can have him. I'll deal. And it seems like we have like a friendly trade-off like that every once in a while. Like you had him last time, I'll have him this time. So we'll start again that second run the second week of third week of September with the Dark Room, and then we'll come back here and do a clinic. As you said, I'm really interested in education, so we'll be doing a clinic at Shawnee Mission East High School during the day, and then playing at the Ship here in Kansas City, and then we go to Tahlequah, Oklahoma, which is quite a drive, and we'll play at Northeastern University for a nice concert there, and we'll finish that second part of the tour at Rudy's Jazz Room in Nashville on the 21st. So a lot of miles in our future, a lot of hangs. It's important that you pick the right people, because all that driving and all that time together can be great or it can be absolutely miserable. So these guys, they get in the car and they get to the gig on time and prepared and happy to play the music. It's like, who am I to say boo?
Before we started the podcast, I mentioned that I had lived in Normal, Illinois. I know you're from Normal as well. And I
Yeah,
was in Chicago for a while, but I never had the opportunity of seeing you live when you were in the Midwest. And now I'm, of course, in Atlanta.
sure.
But that's a stone throw away from Nashville. So I'm going to get down to one of your Nashville gigs,
Amazing.
see you. That'll be fantastic.
Very cool.
Um, so anything else you want to add about the album? I mean, you are extremely busy and you're a veteran, obviously. You're young, but you're a veteran and your catalog, I mean, I had forgotten how much work you have done, how many albums you've done, and your website just really lays it out really well.
Thanks. Like I said, it's somewhere between a compulsion and just how I've always been. You know what I mean? I'm not one to sit on my hands. And as I get older, I've become try to be in the backside of the beat a little bit more, but I've always been on the front side of things, and what's next and what's coming up. And I think, it's an old adage that until you experience it or start to have glimpses of it, you're like, yeah, whatever. But time is your biggest asset. So to be able to be in a position where I can more or less dictate what my schedule is musically and professionally, and those all coalesce to like an economic viability. It's something that I constantly have to remind myself, because everybody can complain and moan about things, like, oh, I wish I had this or that, but I'm very fortunate. I have an abundance of really great things in my life, not least of which is a very fulfilling musical career. So um, I don't know if there's so much to add beyond what we talked about. We talked about so much. I just think that this record is something that I'm very proud of, and it's a family affair. My son took the picture for the album art. It's of my kitchen, and then he used some kind of like weird filter thing. I mean, he's both my kids are just like
Wow.
crazy smart, but my older son is like, here, like, he made this what you see on the album cover. It's my kitchen counter that's like whatever. I don't know what filter he used or tool. And then I sent that to my brother-in-law, who's a digital media wizard, and I said, hey, can you resize this for streaming? And he not only did he resize it, he like emphasized the text and all that stuff. And I was like, man, I got to use you guys more often. So yeah, it was a nice little way to include everybody.
So
So.
Movable Objects is out September 6th.
Mhm.
Will it be physical copies available, Adam?
That's a good question. I think if I was gonna do it, we're doing this interview on August 20th, right? So no time like the present to order them. But I have a love-hate relationship with that because it's like I kind of want a physical product to remember my, the effort. But the economic viability of that is just like it went away 5-10 years ago, right? So it's it's
Mhm.
it's it's hard, like it's easier to put it on streaming. So I would say maybe, it's on my to-do list in the background here, like CDs question mark. So maybe we'll have them, maybe we won't. But if you don't have them, I can tell you I have boxes of other ones that you could you could buy too. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I make sure that I always get a physical copy of your work. I do have the trio series on
thank you,
CD. I know I have selective amnesia because I listen to that quite often.
thank
So
you,
yeah, if it's available, I'll certainly mention that to my listeners and people who read the blog. It
thank you.
you're, you're such a craftsman. You're such a great tone and such a great composer. It's always good to see another product from you. It's something different. I love the
Awesome.
album.
Thanks so much, Preston. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time as always and your support over the years. I can't believe that Selective Amnesia will turn 10 years old next year. That's
Wow, man.
crazy. It's
Yeah,
nuts. So yeah,
yeah,
man.
it's timeless. So I hope to see you in Nashville and you take care of yourself. And I'm going to turn
All
off the
right.
recording now.